Hi, I'm Ted Wolf, presented by GuideWise. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, where we connect you to the stories and insights of people who have mastered implementation. Why? Because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. Join us as we uncover the secrets of successful implementation so you can conquer your implementation struggles. Today on the Implementors podcast, we're joined by two people who've studied momentum like a science and sparked it in some of the world's most high-stakes arenas. Don Yaeger, 12-time New York Times best-selling author and former Sports Illustrated editor, and Bernie Banks, retired U.S. Army Brigadier General and current director of the Doerr Institute for New Leaders at Rice University, have spent the last 8 years researching what turns a single spark into a sustained fire. Together, they've interviewed over 250 top performers across sports, business, politics, and the military to crack the code behind one of leadership's most misunderstood forces, momentum. Their new book, The New Science of Momentum, lays out a practical model for building and sustaining momentum at every level of leadership, from locker rooms and boardrooms to battlefields and classrooms. In this episode, we will explore how elite performers spot and act on early sparks of momentum, what it takes to build cultures that don't just win, but keep winning, and how emotional intelligence, communication, and belief systems fuel sustained performance. If you've ever tried to rally a team, launch a strategy, or lead change under pressure, this conversation is packed with hard-won insights that you'll want to carry with you. So, Don and Bernie, welcome to the Implementors podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here.
Bernie, I'd like to start with you if I could. Bernie, what is the definition of momentum?
So in the book, we define momentum as a synergistic force that influences the progress, resilience, and focus of a team, and its impact on the mindset of a team, positively or negatively, that can be manipulated and extended. Said in layman's terms, momentum is a mindset. It's a mindset about how forces are either propelling you forward or repelling your efforts to move forward. And that mindset, what we've learned, it most certainly can be impacted or influenced and extended. It is not something you just experience. It's something you can act upon.
Don, you have a long career and experience in looking at top performers, particularly in sports. How would you define momentum in your words? Street definition, if you will.
Well, I think playing off of, so we came to that definition, Bernie and I did, after hours and hours of conversation with so many of these great leaders. But in street language, right, if to tend to go there would be, momentum is a state of mind, right? It is what do you believe about your circumstances? You can have great momentum. You can have things working really well within your organization, but if your people don't believe it, if your people aren't on board intellectually with what's happening, it's not all that valuable. So it's important that this isn't just a matter of circumstances. It's a matter of mindset.
Okay. And in developing that mindset of momentum, what's the spark that you look for? Is it emotion? What is it that really ignites that momentum?
Well, I'll jump in first. I would tell you that I think the spark in what you're looking for really begins before the spark, right? We talk about, we created a model, as you made reference in your opening. We've created a model for momentum based on all these interviews. How do great, those who manipulate momentum to their advantage, how do they do it? And most people believe it starts with the spark, right? I have to wait on something to happen and then momentum will kick in. But the great ones, the people who are doing magnificent things in this space actually work in advance of the moment to be ready for it. And in that, they're creating a culture that allows them to recruit people who root for each other, right? One of the great inhibitors to momentum is this sense that it has to be mine in order for it to be good. If in a sales organization, if I'm not the one that completed the sale, then it's not a good sale. If you believe that, you are an inhibitor. You are an inhibitor to what could be great momentous opportunity. So it needs to be this sense of that we are in something together, and that you being successful is as good as me being successful. And when you can get the right people in your organization, people who believe that it doesn't have to be me in order for it to be good, when you get the right people there, then moments amplify themselves far more impressively than if you're doing it the opposite way.
Okay. Bernie, it sounded like Don was, in my mind, kind of inferring it's contagious. Do you find that to be the fact?
Absolutely. What we know about leadership is both emotional and resonant. We feel the impact of leadership, and how we feel most certainly radiates outward and starts to influence how others feel around you. And so it is contagion. In the book, we talk about this concept of mirror neurons. You feel leadership. You feel it, and how you show up most certainly informs how others elect to show up. And so, I have a friend, Marshall Goldsmith, who's a world-renowned leadership coach. And he says, for leaders, it's always showtime. It's always showtime. Doesn't mean you ignore what's going on in the world, but when you have a chance to make an impact on the world, do you bring your best to bear? Mm-hmm. And so I always remember that anytime I walk into a room, I understand that I'm going to have an influence on those around me. So I can either seek to make the most of that, or I can squander that opportunity. And the same thing's true in an organizational setting.
So, Bernie, if I can continue on that line of thought, could you describe the emotions or what the feeling is in momentum?
Yeah, I'll go back to some of my times in the military. And so I was a pilot in the military. And I flew an aircraft called the Apache helicopter. And there were times where we were going up against dogged adversaries. You're getting shot at, and it's dark, and there's a lot of things going on. And just in terms of how you communicate over the radio, you can hear the tenor of one's voice. And so my job was always to convey optimism, but also to say, hey, here are the things that have to happen if we're going to win this fight. Right? Mm-hmm. And so it was always incumbent upon me. Am I presenting a calm demeanor in the face of chaos? Because if my voice started getting elevated, if you start to hear, the staccato and everything change, it created anxiety in others. And the last thing you need to do when the stakes are high is to get people too amped up, because you increase stress, performance increases. You increase stress too much, and now performance tapers off. And so getting people into the optimal zone is the key. And so I learned how to always convey calmness when speaking, because it was going to influence how my pilots responded in the moment.
Okay.
And you could just hear it through how people were talking on the radio. You'd hear it.
Do you find the same thing in sports performance?
Yeah, but I don't think it's just voice is important. I think body language is too.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Ted, one of the things we were talking about earlier was the idea of how did this book begin, mm-hmm. and the origin story of the book is dates back 8 years. There was a Super Bowl that was being played in which the New England Patriots were up against the Atlanta Falcons. And the Atlanta Falcons raced out to a big lead. In fact, late in the third quarter, they were ahead 28-3. The odds makers gave them a 99.4% chance of winning the game at that stage. And then suddenly, a couple of good things started to happen. And New England, the momentum changed. The momentum changed sidelines. And it's interesting. The next day, I came in after New England won the game in overtime. And I opened up the whiteboard, brought everybody in my organization that's on the creative team into a room and just wrote the words, how does a moment turn into momentum? How did what happened last night occur? And could it be manipulated? Or did we just have to wait for something good to happen? Mm-hmm. And that began this journey. But one of the interviews I did was with a player named Devin McCourty, who was on the field that night. And he had this great line to talk about the subject we're in right now, which is body language. He said, as momentum shifted and it became obvious that it was with us in that fourth quarter, he said, you could see it in their eyes. He said, the opponent, the Falcons players, their eyes were big because they knew we were coming at them. Our eyes were narrowing because we were locked in. And he said the body language in its own right changed because momentum changed. And I think that just as Bernie was expressing how he managed it as a leader, we will see it in our teammates when things start to move in the right direction. And it's our job. It's our job as leaders to help make that happen.
So in other words, what you're both inferring is that it can be trained, it can be rehearsed to get into that state of momentum. And there are some components perhaps that we can always use and go back to as the basics to get that going. Am I accurate in that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the whole premise of the model we developed, is to allow people to think systemically about how to foster momentum.
So if you could let's start explaining a little bit about the model that you've developed, if we could.
Yeah. Sure. I'll jump in first because I think that this was the part that was most revelatory to me. Maybe not as much to Bernie because, he'd worked in battle planning and other issues before. But for me, I had always imagined that momentum had to start with a moment, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, you begin the word that way. And I always imagined that that's where momentum began. I did not have a full appreciation until all of these interviews that momentum truly begins long before that. It's all in this kind of this opening piece of the model. And in the opening circle of the model that we developed, it really talks a lot about creating the proper culture of the organization, creating the right culture. And that culture has to be one of shared values and shared experience. Like, we're looking to do this together, right? It's not a culture that values any one person so much that they believe that it all has to begin and end with them. And that affects and imparts on your leadership who you should be recruiting. Because now you start recruiting people who, as I said earlier, something good happens, and you were the generator of that good thing. I can feel as good about it because I feel good for that you did it. I can feel as good as if I did it myself. That's that mirror neurons aspect, right? That's where, if I look at you and you've done good and I feel good as a result, then we're in sync. Mm-hmm. And in sync, we then, through preparation, are ready for the moment. Now something happens, and it doesn't matter who on your team makes the shot. Everybody is happy. And when you find teams where things are going really well for them, that's what you'll really discover. Where you find things where they start to fall apart. We tell a great story in the book about the Chicago Bulls when Michael Jordan retired for the first time, and Scottie Pippen was the man. And at the end of an important playoff game, the coach, Phil Jackson, designed a play that was where the shot was to be taken by a different player, not Scottie Pippen. And Pippen refused to enter the game. He actually got into a shouting match with his coach, which destroyed the chemistry of the team because it wasn't about him. And for years, still to this day, when a really selfish act is committed in sports, internally, people call it pulling a Pippen, right? It's still known to this day as pulling a Pippen if you do something that is where I have to be the center in order for it to be good.
Mm-hmm. So, Bernie, if I may ask you, How do you build momentum in a mundane day-to-day job or business? I mean, you're at the Super Bowl, everybody's there, it's game day. You get that. People understand it, but I got to go into work today. And I'm going to do a lot of the same things that I'm doing. And I'm working on a team and they're nice people, but how do you build momentum in that type of an environment?
Yeah, I think that starts with leadership. And so even in an environment where the task can be very routine in nature, there's still an ability to set high standards, to push the boundaries in terms of productivity and a variety of other things, and to unleash creativity by saying, hey, are there ways in which we can take this seemingly mundane thing and turn it on its head and innovate and make it more exciting? That's a function of leadership. It doesn't have to reside in one person. Multiple people can engage in the process of leading. Everyone can. But I think the best leaders are always looking for ways in which they can unleash human potential and help people to see that more is possible. It's inspiration. We all require inspiration, and inspiration can come from a variety of places, but we should be deriving inspiration from actions that leaders are promoting every single day.
And one thing a leader could do in that space, Ted, is to take this series of mundane actions, right, and actually play it forward. Who are we serving by doing this series of mundane actions, right? You wouldn't be doing it if there wasn't someone on the end of the food chain, right, who is going to be better because we did it and we did it well. Actually working within your team to have the team understand who it is they're in service of makes a big difference. Suddenly your mundane action matters more if you know it's going to affect that grandmother who is going to be the recipient of your product and be able to do something special with their grandchild.
So what you're saying is purpose is really important.
Purpose is,
but you got to personalize it. You got to make it a personal purpose, not some, I'm going to say, archaic purpose that has no feel or meaning to it. You've got to make it personal. Is that the start? And is that what you look for in a leader?
Well, leadership's always about relationship. And so a leader, I'm always struck by this phrase, you manage things, but you lead people. Mm-hmm. There's a huge distinction there. And so if you treat people as they're just things, then you miss out on their humanity and the impact you're having on the world around you. And so, yes, great leaders, effective leaders, always help make things personal. They help people to understand why what they are doing matters. Who is impacted by your actions? What happens if we don't take these actions? How are people's lives influenced? Mm-hmm. So right now I don't know if it's still going on, but there was a strike going on in Philadelphia with the public workers. And so sanitation and a variety of other things were halted. And you quickly saw trash piling up, right? And you could look at sanitation as a mundane job, right? Every day I come around, I collect these items. I'm kind of invisible to many people. They notice when it isn't done, but when it is done, nobody really says anything about what I'm doing. But you quickly start to understand, hey, if this doesn't transpire, it changes everyone's quality of life. It changes everyone's productivity. It changes how people perceive our city. It changes so many different things. And so this act that many people don't acknowledge is absolutely essential to everyone's well-being. And if you have a leader that helps drive that home for folks, then it changes how they choose to approach their work every single day.
Mm-hmm. So if I may ask, Don, do you have any stories, examples in the area of sports where the head coach, the leader, whoever it was, actually talked about that personal purpose? Because I know in business very often it's never discussed. It just is not brought up.
So I'll give you a great example. Coach Mike Krzyzewski, who was the head coach at Duke. He was also the head coach of the U.S. men's national basketball team in the Olympic program. Coach K was trying to get these Olympians, the best players in the world, right? These Olympian players to understand they're not playing basketball. They're representing the United States of America. But how does he get them to feel that? How does he get them to do that? And so one of the things that he he did was he started bringing in soldiers to talk to the players. He started bringing in wounded warriors to talk about what it meant to care for each other. And ultimately, one day he takes them to Arlington National Cemetery, where while they're there in the cemetery, there's a young man standing over amongst a group of graves. He's laying down pictures at grave sites. Coach walks over, asks him what he's doing there. And the young man says, "Coach, this was my team. We had a mission and it didn't go as planned. And he says, I'm here today to celebrate them." And Coach K invites that young man to come over and talk to the players. And in the conversation with the players, he tells them what it means to really be a great teammate, what it means to care for each other so much that you'll do anything, one for the other. And he talks about what it means to wear the letters USA on their chest when they get the chance to go to the Olympics. And pretty soon he starts talking about survivor's guilt. He starts crying. He turns around, walks away. And Coach looks at the players and said, "Gentlemen, this is why we're here, because I wanted you to feel what it meant to represent the United States of America." And in that process, he brought to life this idea that they weren't playing basketball. They're representing something. And that's leadership, but it's also, it's an openness to understanding that we're not just doing mundane work, right? Basketball can be very mundane, right? Practices can really stink. But it's not mundane if you believe that you're doing it for a greater purpose. And it doesn't matter what kind of company we're in, whether it's picking up trash or playing Olympic basketball. Does not matter what kind of company we're in. If the company is in service of others, which almost every company is, and that can come to life, it can have great impact on the emotional component of building a great team.
Bernie, I have a question I want to ask you. Just had a great example that Don gave about building and triggering that momentum and then practicing perhaps and rehearsing to make that feeling come back. But sometimes we lose it. Just like we lose trust sometime in ourselves, other people, institutions, things like that. How do you regain trust? How do you regain momentum?
Well, regaining trust can be part of the pathway to regaining momentum, but they are distinct things. And so there are a lot of different conceptions of this phenomenon we call trust. There's one model that I'm fond of utilizing called the trust equation by a researcher named Green. It says trust is a function of four things: credibility, reliability, intimacy, and self-orientation, which is perceived interest alignment. And in order to regain trust, you have to work on which one of those components is low. Sometimes it means that, hey, our interests are not aligned. We've got to figure out how to get them back in line. Sometimes it's, I haven't demonstrated the requisite capability to do what I'm asking of you. Other times it's, I haven't followed through on my commitments to you, or I haven't taken the time to get to really know you. But many times when we lose momentum, it could be a function of, hey, trust has been breached inside the organization. So if we're really going to do work together well, we've got to reestablish that we have a foundation of trust to move forward from. But anytime you find that, momentum is gone against you, what we found time and time again in talking to these leaders across the four different areas is that you don't just start throwing spaghetti against a wall and hoping something occurs. It's go back to the basics, return to the model, ensure that you are doing those elements that are foundational in the model properly, because folks can get seduced by success. They can get blown off axis. And next thing you know, they're not honoring the process. In order to regain momentum, honor the process, honor your basics. You go back to, are we actually living up to the things we espouse in our culture? Are we preparing properly? Are we communicating effectively? Are we ensuring we're taking care of one another? And are we fostering the right kind of beliefs? Because all it takes is one person to become a negative source of energy, and it can spread to everyone else. And so say, hey, that's not how we operate here. That's not who we are. And so getting back to honoring your foundational elements, which is what we talk about in the book, that's how you go about reversing momentum and turning it into positive momentum. And we talked to one individual who's a noted CEO who's been a successful turnaround CEO. And he talks about that, having clarity on here are the things we are going to do. And if we do these things, we are going to be successful. And he laid it out very clear and says, now honor this process, acknowledge the small wins. The small wins become stackable. So they start adding up. It starts changing that mindset. You start seeing different behaviors. But the process, so many people, they're looking for an easy button. They're looking for shortcuts. I'm like, there are no shortcuts.
Mm-hmm. Don, you had mentioned it earlier in our conversation that you hire for culture, in effect. You hire for people that can come together, have that capability. In your experience, how do organizations that are really superior in the way they run and approach and they attract that type of person, what are their core beliefs? And do they actually define those core beliefs that are the basis of the process to build momentum?
Well, I think they do. I think and this comes right to it, right? If your core belief organizationally is we're going to reward, we're going to celebrate, the only people we're going to talk about are the people who sell the most, right? What does that mean? That means that if you sell and I didn't today, I'm not as complete an employee as you are. So immediately you're creating a distance between us. So how are you looking at rewarding, even thinking about the process of your employee base? And as you begin to understand that, some of this should affect how you then maybe readjust or reconfigure your strategies for financial reward and other things, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you take care of people? And do we only take care of those who do the most, or do we recognize that those who do the most actually needed a lot of other people in order to be able to do that? And there needs to be some kind of appropriate approach to that.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it in sports again, where it's easy. John Wooden, I had the chance to work with Coach Wooden, the greatest coach of all time. And Coach said, when he went into a post-game press conference, he never talked about his leading scorer. He never talked about his leading rebounder. He never talked about the person who had the most assists, because those people were already going to get credit, right? He talked about the people that had the greatest week of practice. Who was it that gave, maybe someone that didn't even see the floor? How do you build your model of celebration? And that has a big piece in how you create the right culture.
Bernie, I can't help but thinking when we talk about culture and leadership and the momentum that you build and you can rehearse, 3 words come to my mind: honesty, respect, and empathy. Can you get momentum without those 3 core values, I'll say?
Well, let's take each one. Honesty. If you are not honest, you will erode trust over time. And trust is like the invisible glue, right? And so you do need to be honest. Now, it doesn't mean that you share everything with everyone, but you share what you can with everyone when you can. And you don't make up stuff along the way. All right. So that was number 1. What was number 2?
Respect.
Respect. I go back to this notion, you manage things, but you lead people. If you're going to lead people well, guess what? They have a choice always. You can disrespect somebody once and maybe get away with it. You disrespect somebody routinely and you're going to turn around and they're no longer there. You have to treat people with dignity and respect. What's number 3?
Empathy.
Empathy.
Mm-hmm.
I go back to leadership always involves 2 or more people. You want to influence somebody well, you need to know where they're at so that you can then figure out how do you get them where you want them to go.
Mm-hmm. So, Don, I have to come to you now. Using those same 3 words, honesty, respect, and empathy, I want you to think of some of the greatest sports competitive individuals who can get that momentum and hold it, not just get it, but hold it. How important is it for them to look at honesty within themselves? Am I being honest with myself? Am I respecting myself? Do I have empathy for myself? Which means I have to own everything I'm putting out there.
Well, I'll go back to Coach Wooden, right? Who was an enormous influence on my life. We worked together for 12 years. We wrote a book together on the power of mentoring. Coach, all three of those words right there would be central to everything he believed about the way he would lead others. But as you said, he also knew, as is a key element of the West Point tradition, that the first person you have to lead is yourself.
Mhm.
And if you can't lead yourself with those three elements, you'll never be able to lead the others, anyone else, the same way.
So in many respects, we can look at culture and say culture is really the work on yourself to embody the core values of the organization so you can work together and build momentum in pursuit of the purpose.
I don't think you can build a culture that you don't believe in, right? I don't believe you can't build a culture that you wouldn't want to thrive in. And so you can't, because that's dishonest, right? To begin with, like if we say, hey, we're going to value everybody. I mean, I love it. One of the great stories years ago, as Wells Fargo was fighting through all of its challenges, that, they were saying, we want our people not to feel very transactional and all these phone calls they're making to people to get them to do business. We want our call center people to listen and and hear those that they're working with. But at the end of the day, they continue to measure their call center people by how many calls they took per hour. So it doesn't matter what you say, it's what you do.
Yes.
And so
walk your talk. Yeah.
Walk your talk.
So let me ask then, what's the place for emotional intelligence and momentum? Self-awareness, emotionally and cognitively even.
Yeah. So if you go back to the leadership component, right? We know that highly effective leaders tend to have high degrees of emotional intelligence. The higher you go in an organization, the more EQ matters. IQ helps get you started. And IQ can help you rise, but EQ is what allows you to thrive over time. You take a look at Goldman's work, and EQ has 5 components: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skill. So it's one of the 5 core components, according to Goldman's research, around this notion that we call emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're trying to get organizations to do really challenging things, which involve risk, really knowing who you're dealing with matters. And then tailoring your actions to address their interests. And so it can't be a one size fits all. The best leaders don't simply do the same thing to everybody. They do the right thing with everybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so nobody's out there alone. What do you do in an organization, or what do organizations do that are top performing when they have a leader that just isn't conforming to the groupthink? They're in it for themselves. They're building that silo of self-interest. How do they nudge them out? How do they move them away?
I think this comes back to, what do you hold people accountable for?
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's a great story where when Alan Mulally took over Ford, he implemented what he called a business plan review, where he brought in all the key leaders of the company every week to take a look at each of the major areas of the company and to provide an assessment of, are you green, amber, or red? And for the first series of meetings, despite the fact the company was losing billions of dollars, everyone kept saying they were green. And, Alan kind of chuckled. He's like, I'd hate to see what amber or red looks like. Everyone was green because they had a culture of, we don't acknowledge fault. And so one day, one of the senior leaders actually said, for this, we're amber. And you heard a hush go over the entire audience, because in Ford, prior to Alan, that would have been an off with your head moment. And so Alan said, okay, well, I can't solve the issue, but the individuals who can are all part of this call. Let's start figuring it out together. And it started to change everything. And so you have to role model the behavior you want to see in others. You have to display vulnerability, but you also have to hold people to account. So that individual gets on board, others start getting on board. And Alan said, hey, if you start getting testy with someone, just apologize. Just apologize. And so there was an individual that was part of that collective who constantly was getting on other people's case. And then he'd have to come back and apologize. And Alan said, ultimately, he goes, the intent here is for you not to have to apologize repeatedly about the same thing. And the individual said, well, I just don't know if I can do that. And Alan said, well, that's okay. But we need to have a conversation then about what's next for you, because we are committed to doing this. If you aren't, that's totally fine, but it means that you won't have a place here at Ford. So let's talk about where you're going. It's been said that he had a titanium, he's the nicest guy, but he had a titanium backbone. Holding people to account is an act of love. And when you have somebody who's demonstrated a staunch unwillingness to kind of move to what your expectations are, then you have to have the courage to say, well, what's next then? Because we're doing this. It doesn't mean that you expect them to jump on board right away, but there is a line in the sand. And once it's reached and you've done all you can to try to give them that opportunity to move to meeting the new expectations, then you have to have them move on. And so many times you have people that will grouse about stuff folks aren't doing, but they won't actually hold them accountable for the lack of meeting your expectations. And a lack of accountability never results in excellence, ever.
So, Don, what do you say to a leader who is leading transformation, trying to it, but they feel the momentum is starting to slip?
Well, I think one of the things I love about this book is that the last part of the book is dedicated to that idea of that momentum isn't always working for you. Sometimes it's working against you. And in those situations, you need to have a plan. There has to be a model that you have to also be willing to follow if you're trying to reverse momentum. And the first step in reversing it, and again, if you start to think that it's slipping, that is a reversal, right? If you've been forwardly momentous and suddenly it's not, that you have to treat that as a reversal. First thing you have to do is and Bernie has used this line multiple times, you have to speak truth to your audience, right? You have to let them know that you see what's happening. And then secondly, you have to be able to convey to them that you're not just aware of it, you're working on a game plan to do something that's forward moving, and that you in fact have some level of opportunity here. You've experience on that will allow you to believe that you can turn this around. They have to believe you. Remember, we talked about it. It's a state of mind. And they have to believe you because you spoke truth to them. They are more likely to believe you. Mm-hmm. And then as wins begin to occur, little wins, you amplify them. You might celebrate a small win as you might once have celebrated the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. But you're doing so because you want each of these small wins to suddenly be stacked one upon each other. Bernie called them stackable wins, and that's exactly what we're looking for. That's how, when it begins to slip, when it's working against you, you have to build a plan that at least leans into those elements.
Mm-hmm. Don and Bernie, I think you mentioned that you interviewed 250 people or over 250 people for the book. That's a lot of interviews. That's a lot of personal, empathetic understanding and listening, active listening. Do any of those interviews stand out in your mind that really okay, this one grabbed me?
Oh, there were so many. There really were. We were talking to fascinating people. Fascinating people. Don knows that one of my favorite interview was with James Carville. I just found him to be an extraordinary human being. Very generous with his time, very down to earth, such sharp insight and intellect, and an encyclopedic command of the American politics. It's just a remarkable, remarkable conversation in the living room of his home while he was preparing to go on vacation the next day. And so
we were
all
laughing.
this stuff
He's
going
got
on around us.
Mary Madeline, his wonderful wife, is sitting in the other room getting her hair done. James is just going. He's getting excited and jumping up and talking, and it was fantastic. I agree.
So good, so good.
And for me, I would think an interview that we did that was really powerful was with the basketball coach who at the time was at Texas A&M. He is now at Maryland, named Buzz Williams. Buzz is just fantastic in the way he thinks about this topic and the way he prepares his team to be ready for momentum to occur.
So do you find military, sports organizations focus on momentum more deliberately, consciously than business organizations or business leaders that you've talked to?
I would say that's probably true.
Okay.
Well, here's what I'll say about that. I think you find it across all four things. But sports, it's part of the daily vernacular. And in the military, it's actually concepts that are codified in military doctrinal manuals.
Mm-hmm.
So in the military, we talk about the notion of always seize the initiative, which is be on the offense. Even when you're on the defense in the military, it's all in service of getting back to be on the offense. And so we train people in the military to become adept at learning what it takes to seize the initiative. So it's something we actually develop over time in all of our service members. And in sports, there's not a coach out there that doesn't talk about the importance of, hey, seizing the momentum, making sure we're doing the right things. In basketball, we've got to get 3 consecutive stops or, name your thing, whatever it is. But you also, in the good organizations in business, they talk about it as well, but it might not be as prevalent in daily conversations as it is in the military and in sports.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The book that you've put together is very impressive. And I think, honestly, it is giving definition and bringing the whole concept of momentum into, I'm going to say, a business environment that just doesn't talk to their people the same way. Fascinating. I hope a lot of people go out and buy the book. What out
Ted,
of the
we
book?
do too. We very much hope the same. I'm glad we're all in
we
this
would be thrilled with that outcome, Ted.
If momentum begins because of you, Ted, we're all in the same conversation.
Wow, I appreciate your honesty. It makes me feel an awful lot better, and I respect you even more now. What's the future look like for you? What will you be doing in the future?
Well, I hope I'm chasing questions like this one. I'm insatiably curious. I'm always looking at situations and asking, why did that happen and what can we learn from it? And so that would be my thing.
Okay. Bernie, how about yourself?
I think my thing is pouring my energy and experiences into others' lives in the hope that it can unlock the ability for them to accomplish things that matter to them. The field of talent development, it's not about you. It's about you helping to amplify others in the hopes that they can do a better job of influencing the world around them. So going forward, I see myself just continuing to pour energy into others. And hopefully that tries to make the world a little better place, one person at a time.
Very good. Very good. And then, Don, what's the best place to contact you should someone want to talk with you?
Well, I have donyaeger.com and DONYAEGER.com. I also own it with other misspellings of my name, which is good because you want to make sure you can direct people to you no matter how they decide to butcher your name. And we through that site, we take a lot of inbound and we answer all the questions we can.
Okay. And Bernie, how about yourself? What's the best way to contact you?
Best way to contact me is via LinkedIn.
Very, very interesting. I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you sell 1 million+ books.
Go, Ted. This is on you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank
very
you.
much. Appreciate
Thanks.
it. Thank you for watching this episode of Implementors. If you found this conversation valuable, please click the like button. It helps others facing similar challenges discover and benefit from these conversations. We also welcome your insights and reflections, so please share your thoughts in the comments. We truly value thoughtful engagement from leaders like you. If these conversations resonate with the work you're doing, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to stay updated on future episodes. And if someone in your network would benefit from this dialogue, consider passing it along. Great implementation and execution always starts with great conversations. And at the end of the day, ideas are just the beginning. It's implementation and execution that drives meaningful results. So thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time. And as always, stay grounded, stay curious, and keep implementing.